Well, I want to say welcome, whether it's your first time in a long time, or you come all the time, whether you're joining us online or in person at one of our locations. We're thrilled to have you with us. Today, we're concluding our series on Noah and the flood called Under Clear Blue Sky. And if you haven't been here for any of it, I'll catch you up a little bit as I can in just a minute. But today, what I want you to know is we're finally going to make it to the flood. Some of you are like, okay, we're actually going to talk about the flood. We are going to actually make it to the flood today, but we're not going to make it all the way through the story. I just want you to know up front. I'm going to disappoint you on the front end. Hopefully you're not disappointed at the end, but on the front, we're not going to make it all the way. We're not going to make it to the dry land. We're not going to make it to the rainbow. And there's so much more, and you should explore this. I hope some of what this series has done is caused you to want to dig into these really rich, brilliant Old Testament narratives that we have. And today, we're going to talk about the flood, but here's what I want you to know right up front. And this is sort of the spoiler alert. The flood is not the point of the story. We talked a lot about the ark last week, and there's way more verses about the construction of the ark than there is about the flood. The flood is not the point of the story, just as, by the way, in the story of Jonah, the fish is not the point of the story. We get so hung up on some of these things sometimes, and the fish and the flood, they have meaning. And the authors want us to understand what that meaning is, which is their goal for them was not to create a play-by-play of what actually happened in these circumstances. As a matter of fact, as it relates to the story of Noah and the flood, I think the author would be so disappointed to know we spent so much time, people have spent so much time proving and disproving, debating the scale or the scope of the flood. And I think the author would go, wait, stop. That's not the point. Which is why we're not debating, did it happen? Now, I told some of you, I'm willing to have that debate with you, and we'll just do it online. And several of you took me up. You emailed me. We've had some great discourse. I've sent you some resources, which has been awesome. I love that, and I'm happy to have this conversation. It's not that I want to sidestep it. It's not that I don't think it's important. It's just not important for our purposes. What I want to talk about is not did it happen, but what does it mean? And that's what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And I got one person email me that said, well, if it didn't happen, who cares what it means? It doesn't matter, except if you're going to throw that out, you're going to throw out every parable of Jesus and every other story that you're not sure if they really happened or not. In the real world, some of you may be skeptical. This is the story of the tortoise and the hare. Nobody debates who won the race or how, right? Nobody believes the point of the story because they believe there was actually a turtle that beat a bunny in a race. That's not why you believe it. It's because life bears out the fact that it's true. Our life experience teaches us that slow and steady wins the race. And these stories are, now, here's what you need to hear from me. People have this question. I believe the flood happened. Both Jesus and the Apostle Paul and 4 extra biblical ancient narratives talk about the flood. Now, the size and the scope and how it all happened and what was preserved, I don't know the answers to all of those things. I don't think anybody does. But there's a massive difference between debating details and excavating meaning. And with these really old stories, that's the goal, is to excavate meaning from this for our lives, which is what we did in week 1. We kind of put on our ancient literary glasses to understand the context for the flood. Before we even got to the ark or the idea of the flood, what was the context? And what we realized was we had to go back to the very beginning of Genesis. And what we saw is that God created the world and he separated the waters. And when he separated the waters, he created the world and he looked at everything he created through separation and through expansion of the world. At the end of that, he says 7 times that everything he saw was good. And then he told them to be fruitful and multiply. But what happened after that is man decided not to do what God instructed him to do. Man decided that they were going to see for themselves, and they saw what seemed good to them. And even though God saw what he had created and it was all good and he gave it to the man, man saw what he thought was good or what seemed good to him, and he decided to take it. And this is a story, this is the 4th story in the series of stories. And what was the result was not Tov, the good that God designed in the beginning. It resulted in Ra, or evil. And this is the fourth time now. It's the story of Eve and the story of Cain and the story of Lamech. Now the story of Noah, and it's cosmic because there's other beings involved. You have to go back to week 1 to find all that. But the author is describing, and we said this, for the last time this week, I'm gonna keep drawing this. God separated the waters in the beginning. And what's being described in the flood stories is these waters that were above and below, and we actually don't have all the time in the world. I wish we had to talk about some of that, because this is an interesting metaphor and an interesting idea in itself. But what the author of Genesis is describing in the flood story is that because of man's choices, the floodwaters that God separated when he created order out of chaos, which is what the water represents, it represents chaos, is collapsing back in on itself. Not because God's angry and he sent something to destroy the world, but because God's grieved. And God, in his goodness, he gave us free will. And one of the things that God will do is he will hand us over to our desires, and he's handing humanity over to their desires. And catastrophe is inevitable. That's what's happening in the context of the flood story. And this has been going on. This is, again, it's a series. When you read it right together, you see this pattern. The same thing happens over and over. This is the fourth story, and every time it intensifies. So, the very first question we ask, the narrative is asking of us is, who gets to define what is good? And who gets to define what is good for you? Because you see things that seem good to you in the same way the people in the patterns of these stories did. But who has decision rights when it comes to what is good for you? Then last week, we looked at all about the ark. If you weren't here, I cannot possibly catch you up on that. But here's something to pique your interest. If you weren't here last week, here's what I want you to know. The ark is not a boat. It's not a boat. There's no sails, there's no rudder, there's no oarsman. Noah wasn't asked to be a captain. In fact, the word ark is an ancient Hebrew word, the word tabah. And it means box or chest, is a preservation box. We unpacked all the instructions, and I drew it, and it was not impressive because you're like, I could draw that. It's a big box. Who couldn't draw the box? But that's the instructions we got, and God gave the instructions for the preservation, this preservation box for the preservation of life in the midst of the storm that was coming. And part of what we said, the application or the meaning of the story for us is that when we construct our lives according to God's instructions, it can preserve our lives, preserve relationships, preserve our families in the midst of the storms that we're not even sure are coming yet, that we don't know are coming. And the second question that we pulled out of the narrative is, whose instructions are constructing your life? Who's instructing what you're constructing in your life, inside and out? On the inside, your mind and your will and your emotions. Who's instructing the shaping of you on the inside and on the outside, which is sort of the idea of the ark, this preservation box. Now, I want to pick up where we left off last week. We didn't make it all the way to the end of chapter 6. We spent the last 2 weeks in chapter 6. We didn't make it quite all the way to the end. And the very last verse is important for the context of chapter 7, in which we're going to look at today. The very last verse in chapter 6 says this: Noah did everything just as God commanded him. So all the instructions were given, and Noah did everything just as God commanded him. And this is really important because Genesis chapter 7 starts this way. Then the Lord God said to Noah, enter the box, enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation. Now there's so much going on. I just encourage you, just a quick note, when you're reading the Bible, read it slowly and observe what's going on. There's so much, there's more than we could possibly have time for today. I know that sounds really nerdy, but there is. Back in chapter 6, if we were to compare this back to chapter 6, the author is the one who told us that God's eyes rested on Noah. Remember, Noah's name means comfort or to console. God who's grieving, his eyes rest on Noah. The author tells us that. But now, after Noah has done everything God instructed him to do, now the Lord is speaking here. And God says, I have seen you to be righteous. And this is after the construction of the ark. That's exactly what the author is referring to, is what just happened in the previous verses. And then I want you to tuck this away because we're gonna come back to it later. He says, you alone I have seen to be righteous. There's nobody else. You alone I've seen to be righteous. Yet, it's interesting. He permits Noah, in fact, he instructs Noah to take with him his entire family, his entire household. And that's not it. It's not just his family. He goes on, take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals. I want you to observe with me. 7 pairs of all clean animals. The male and his mate, which actually means the man and his wife, or the man and his woman. And a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate. And 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens, also male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And every living thing that I have made, I will blot out from the face of the ground. Now, just really quick, what stands out? I kind of highlighted it for you, so I'm not gonna call on you and make you say it out loud or make you look like you didn't have your homework done for class. But here's the very first thing that we recognize is this number. Did anybody recognize? I highlighted it several times. I hope you recognized it. But this number 7. This number 7 we see throughout the scriptures. He talks here about the 7 pairs of clean animals and the 7 pairs of birds and the 7 days in which the flood is going to come. The word 7 I mentioned earlier. God said 7 times that everything he created was good. The creation of the world was in 7 days. The word, or the number 7 is the number of completion. The number of completion, or the number of perfection. These are the 2 ideas that are put forth when we see the number 7. You can think perfection or completion. This is what we're seeing. And so when you look at the animals first, the animals represent something, and the animals represent the land. And then the birds represent the sky. This is all right here in this text. And then the days, the 7 days, those 7 days represent time, and specifically they were the time of creation. And the author's trying to leave breadcrumbs for us. He's trying to drop hints to us. And this is all pointing towards something. This is pointing towards an idea or a foreshadowing of what is about to come. And it ends up being a theme that happens throughout the scriptures. We see this. And it's the idea that God, he's not done with the world. He's just about to bring new creation. And this is the preservation of what's needed in order to create new creation. And so it's as we talked about last week, it's new creation by preservation. New creation by preservation. God could have just wiped everything out and started over. But if you remember, 7 times God said over and over, the things that he created, they were good. So God gathers the things that were the genesis of what he created. All the things. This is the story of Genesis 1. The things that God created when he separated the waters and he created the sky and the land and every creature that was in the world. And then he tells them to take pairs. This is on purpose. The male and his mate, or the male and his wife, this is setting up new creation. This is setting up a fresh start. This is so they can again be fruitful and multiply, but multiplying only what is good. And they're in proximity to who? They're coming, all of them, the family that are not righteous, the animals, they're all coming with the righteous one. They're coming with Noah into the ark. Now, God is entrusting this process. He's entrusting a massive responsibility to Noah. And it's one that Noah didn't ask for. And it's no small task, but there was no time to ask for questions. I mean, imagine he's got to get all these animals and get his whole family. This is controlled chaos, and get it into the ark. Talk about trying to take chaos and put it into order. That's why there's rooms in the ark, and he's tasked with bringing them all into this big preservation box. So we need to actually get on to the story. And Noah, we see, did all that the Lord had commanded him. Again, it's repetition. This is valuable. This is a validation of Noah's faith and trust in God. God instructs him, and Noah does exactly as he's commanded. Now, in these verses, all this stuff that God just commanded him to do, we're gonna see 2 more times. Now, as we read it, you're gonna be like, didn't we already read that verse? And so these verses are gonna sound similar, but what we're actually given is 2 camera angles. We're gonna be given 2 different camera angles of what happened next. And the reason they're similar to God's instructions is because Noah did everything that God commanded him. And so we're gonna see it from 2 different perspectives, what actually happened in the flood, and they mirror God's instructions because Noah followed what God said. These 2 different camera angles are verses 6, in case you're taking notes and you wanna come back this later, verses 6 through 10, and then verses 11 through 16. These are the two different camera angles that we're gonna look at when it comes to the story of what Noah did to prepare for the flood. So verse 6, and by the way, they start the same way. You'll see the parallel coming, these 2 panels. Hang with me, by the way. This is a lot, but it's really important. And you're gonna find this story is really unlike any other of these Old Testament narratives. In fact, it's a first in all of the Bible at this point. So Noah was 600 years old when the flood of the waters came upon the earth. The next, you'll see in a minute, the parallel version of this second angle, it starts the same way. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the box. I'm gonna keep saying it because I love it. Went into the box to escape the waters of the flood, and of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, meaning a pair of each, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. And then, after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So our first camera angle, and we can't talk about camera angles without having a camera. So let's get our camera here real quick. The first of our 2 camera angles is from the perspective of humanity. So if you notice, as I was reading, all of this stuff is what Noah did. It's where he went, how he operated, what Noah did in terms of what he took. So this whole first perspective is what Noah does. And now we're gonna see it again in a minute from the divine perspective. But this first camera angle that we're gonna get here is all from the perspective of humanity. It's from the perspective of what Noah can control and what Noah did. And if you think about it, this is what Noah did. The first thing that Noah does is he believes God. God says, hey, in 7 days, a flood is coming. And here's what you need to do, prepare. You need to get your whole family, you need to get all these animals, and you need to get in the ark. And Noah believed him. Now, this isn't believe like he thinks God is right, because people will tell you what they think, but they do what they believe. And Noah believes God. And so he jumps into action. He not only believes, but we see that Noah, he obeys. He does exactly what God tells him to do. He follows the instructions, and even the ones that didn't make sense. We don't have time to get into this, too. It makes sense, the male and female, why you bring a pair of all the animals. But what about the clean and unclean? Some of you have questions for that. You should dig into that. It's fascinating. It has to do with the sacrificial system later. If you want to understand your faith and the roots of your faith, like these are important things about how we make sacrifices and what kind of sacrifices are pleasing to God. We don't have time to talk about that today. Okay, I got to keep going. So Noah, he believes, he obeys, and then Noah waits. Anybody bad at waiting? I'm terrible. I am probably the worst at waiting. I'm just not good at it. And Noah, imagine, he gets into the ark, gets everybody in the ark, and I don't know how long it took him to do that, but he knew in 7 days the flood's coming. And here he is in this big box with chaos, and he's like, I just see blue skies, God. What are we doing here? Like, I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And just imagine the doubting Imagine the questioning. Imagine the dissension amongst family members in the box. Some of you, this is my own personal hell, being stuck in a box with all of these people and all these animals. But this is where Noah is, because he followed God's instructions. Now, the second camera angle, we're gonna come back to that. Verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life. So it's a little different perspective. It feels like it's more like somebody's telling the story about Noah. It's like more than a third perspective. This is like a divine perspective because it gets more specific. God is very specific about his timing. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Remember I told you? All the fountains of the deep burst forth. And, he tells us, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On that very day, Noah and his sons, he names them specifically, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. They had with them every wild animal according to its kind. This is how God created them, according to their kind in the Genesis account. All livestock according to their kinds. Every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind. And every bird according to its kind. Everything with wings. Maybe even the pterodactyls, I don't know. But everything with wings. And then we're told, then the Lord shut him in. He shut him in. This is the second angle of the perspective of what's going on in the story. Now, we need another camera because we had a second angle, so I'll try to do this quickly. I know the camera isn't the most important part, but it is kind of interesting. It looks kind of interesting to me. I'm a visual learner, so it'll remind me. I'm looking from a different angle. So this is our second angle, and this is not from the perspective of what Noah does. This is the perspective of what God does. So what does God do in the story? The first thing that God does, and the first thing that God is always doing, is God governs. He's governing, and nothing gets by him. In the 600th year, the second month, the 17th day, probably the 3rd hour, the 41st minute, and the 9th second. I don't know. God knows exactly when this happened because God's governing what's going on. And at that moment, right when God allowed it, when he was not only governing, he relented. In that moment, at just the right time, when God said it was going to happen, he allowed the great deep to burst open and the windows of heaven to open up. And it began to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And the earth began to flood. But I love this last verse. Then the Lord shut him in. Then God secures. He governs, he relents, he hands them over to, and then God secures. This is what's amazing about the original languages is this Hebrew word. It actually can mean very similar to this idea. God gives them, he entrusts them, he gives them over into the box, to the safety of the box, and he closes them in. It's the same idea, but a very different idea. He's handing humanity over to their desires. He's handing Noah over to the safety of the box that he instructed him to create. It's brilliant literature. And for 40 days, the flood kept coming on the earth. And as the waters increased, they lifted the box, they lifted the ark high above the earth. And the waters rose and they increased greatly on the earth. And the ark floated on the surface of the water. Then, 2 final things that are not really part of these perspectives, but a result of what Noah did and a result of what God did. You can't make this up. This is what Noah does. Once the waters start to flood, Noah rests. And what day does Noah rest on? You can't make it up. He rests on the seventh day, and he's trusting God who is good, who's recreating good in his life and in the world, and has entrusted him a responsibility. This is out of Noah's hands. The waters are rising. He's done his part. He's done what God's instructed him to do, and now he's resting in God's governance of the world. And what does God do? What happens as a result of Noah following God's instructions? God rescues Noah and his family and all the animals. This is important. Noah did a lot, but in the end, Noah rests, and God is the one who rescues. He's the one who provides the refuge. This is another theme in the Old Testament, a refuge, an ever-present help in the time of trouble or in the midst of chaos. I want you to notice what's happening here. That what's happening here is Noah's faith is activating something in the world around him. Noah's faith in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the windows of heaven opening up and the floods bursting forth, the world is collapsing into chaos. And Noah, by God's instructions, is leading a movement of order and of safe refuge. And he's leading his family, and he's leading God's creation that God wanted to preserve in this box away from catastrophe. They still got to go through the storm. They didn't evade the storm, but they're evading catastrophe. And what Noah's doing is he's bearing the weight of responsibility, and he's bearing the weight of the responsibility of something that's beyond his responsibility. The truth is Noah was the one who was found righteous in God's eyes. Yet Noah is bearing responsibility for humanity's irresponsibility. Humanity's irresponsibility has led to Noah's responsibility. Noah is tasked with preserving life itself, his family, the animals, the future of creation. This is no small task on no small scale. He builds this impossible structure first. Then he's got to go get all these different pairs of every living creature that God created. And what actually happened is God brought them. When you read it, we skipped over a few verses, but when you read them, it actually says that they came to Noah. It's the same language of when God brought the animals to Adam and Eve to name them in the beginning. He brings the animals to Noah, and they go into the ark. And God, through Noah, he's recreating order from the chaos that is happening all around him. He's leading this movement of order that is in the midst of this chaos. And some of you have experienced this. But this is really important. In the Genesis narrative, we've only to this point, we've only seen the effects of sin being passed from one generation to the next. It happened in Genesis chapter 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now for the first time in Genesis chapter 7, that's not by the author's design because he didn't name the chapters, but I think it's amazing. In chapter 7, this is the first time we see the effects of one person's righteousness being passed on or passed down from generation to the next. Noah accepts an overwhelming burden, and that burden becomes his purpose. Now, this is so important. Purpose and meaning often comes on the other side of responsibility. It's found in the adoption of responsibility. You know this. You've seen this. When you accept greater responsibility, that's where leadership comes from. Greater responsibility means providing for others and caring for others. And when we accept greater responsibility, we find greater meaning and purpose in life. And so the final question I think this narrative is asking of us is, where might you have the ability to take on greater responsibility? Noah didn't have to take on this responsibility. It's not what he wanted to do necessarily, but he was chosen for it. God invited him into something extraordinary. And I wonder, for you, where are things collapsing around you? Where are you experiencing chaos? Maybe it's of your doing, maybe it's of somebody else's doing. Where is their proximity for you to chaos? And what if your proximity to that chaos is an invitation for you to take on greater responsibility? It might just be that the greater purpose and meaning that you're looking for is waiting just on the other side of that burden or that chaos that you've been avoiding. And maybe it's not your fault. Maybe it's not your fight. Maybe it wasn't your failure. It wasn't your irresponsibility. And so in your mind, you're thinking, it's not my responsibility. But I want you to think about for a second what's at stake for the people around you and for the people that are coming behind you. What if the salvation of a marriage is at stake? If you would just do the thing that God's asking you to do, to step in and take some responsibility. Maybe it's your marriage to go first and to apologize and to own what's yours, not to own what's not yours, but to take responsibility. Even though maybe you were the one that was wronged or betrayed. Well, what if the salvation of a family is at stake? Yours or somebody else's, your greater family. Well, what if the salvation of somebody's future, your kid's future, the next generation, finding salvation through God? Make no mistake, I'm not saying you're gonna save anybody. God does the rescuing. But he might be providing instructions for you. He might be inviting you to step into, take on a responsibility or a burden or chaos that it isn't yours. What if somebody's soul around you is at stake? Come on. Our churches, our collection churches, our network, what if our community and our culture is at stake? What if the salvation of our world is at stake? I believe it is. What if God's inviting us to take on greater responsibility, to do the right thing, to do right by God, to follow his instructions, to live as righteous in our generation for the salvation of people that are in proximity to us? Years ago, I was having a conversation with one of the elders of our church. And we were just having a conversation. He said, hey, just really kind, caring conversation. He said, hey, what keeps you awake at night? Oh, that's a great question. What keeps me awake at night? And I thought about it for a minute and I answered. I don't think I had a great answer to that. I probably need to think about it some more. But I turned it back on him. I said, what about you? What keeps you awake at night? And his answer to this question has marked me for years. He said, you know what I worry about? I worry that I might run into somebody that I know and that I care about on the other side of heaven that I didn't share my faith with, that I didn't take responsibility for helping them find salvation in Jesus. And I imagine they look me in the eye with tears in their eyes. They say, why didn't you tell me? You knew. You knew this is what was coming. You knew this is where things were headed, and you were too busy. You were too afraid. You were too shy. You were too worried I'd be offended or think you were weird. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Imagine if Noah had decided this was not his responsibility. He was righteous. He built the box. Then he got in, and God shut the door, and the floodwaters came. And his family's on the outside, and they're shouting, Noah, you knew? Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you step in and help us? That would have been the right thing to do, right? Let me go back to the very beginning. This is the context for the whole flood story, the part about the flood. The Lord said to Noah, enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation. It is true that one can and should be righteous on behalf of others. And others can be saved because of the righteousness of one. It's on page 7 of our Bible, of your Bible. This is a theme. This is a central theme of the one cohesive story the Bible is telling from beginning to end, the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament scriptures. And this, I'm sorry for my emotion, it's so brilliant. When we dismiss stories like this, it's unimaginably naive. This is right here. It's the righteousness. It's the righteousness of the one. Of course, I'm going to mess it up. The righteousness of the one, you get the idea, that leads to salvation for the many. The righteousness of the one that leads to the salvation of the many. This is the story of the New Testament. Hear me right. God has invited you and me into acts of righteousness, to live rightly before him, to live as he's instructed us. You save nobody. That's God's job. God's the one that's rescuing. But the truth is he's invited you to do your part and to rest in his instructions, knowing that it matters. And it doesn't just matter for you. You never act independently. You don't. When you say, it's my life, it's not just your life. Your life has so much more meaning than just your little existence. And God wants to expand that meaning, expand that purpose. It happens through the adoption of greater responsibility. You never act independently. Your decisions of faith have a cascading effect into your future. Your future self will thank you for it. It has a cascading effect relationally, culturally, generationally. Your decisions, your adoption of responsibility, it matters. Let me ask you, I'm gonna adjust the question just a little bit. Where has God entrusted you with ability to take on greater responsibility? It could mean the salvation from catastrophe for somebody in proximity to you. Somebody who has a storm coming their way in their life. What if God wants you to be part of his grand salvation plan, his new creation in your life and in the life of people around you, his restart for people who need a restart in some area of their life because you were willing to take on a burden or a responsibility. It wasn't necessarily yours, but it was one that, empowered by God, he could do something that only he could do through your life. I believe he is. If you're here today, I'll just tell you this, somebody brought you for the first time, or you're at any one of our locations, or somebody sent you a link to this, it's likely somebody who cares a lot about you. They love you. And they're trying to do right, not just by God, but by you. And they want you to know what's coming. And they want you to avoid catastrophe. You know, you could be that for somebody. You could be that for somebody's life, maybe today, for their marriage, for their family, for their financial future, for their own personal well-being. And my prayer is that you would say yes to God as Noah did and do everything as the Lord is instructing you, as he's commanding you, so that he can bring about the salvation of many through the righteousness of some. Let me pray for you. If you're here today and you're somebody and you just go, wow, I need that. I need rescuing. There's one named Jesus, whose act of righteousness once and for all time canceled the sin debt of all humanity to make us right with God. And you today could place your faith in him just by saying a simple prayer. You could pray along and you could say, God, I know I have gone the wrong way. I've not followed your instructions. I've led my life into chaos. And I need a restart. I need a new start. Bring about new creation in me. Recreate my life, recreate my relationships, recreate my future. I put my faith and trust in the righteousness of Jesus, the penalty he paid for me on the cross to put me in right relationship with you, and the way he conquered both sin and death through the cross and through his resurrection to give me new life so that I could be a new creation in you. Just by confessing that with your mouth and believing that Jesus was raised from the dead, the scripture says it brings you to new life. You become a new creation. God, I pray for people who, in the sound of my voice, decided to make that decision today. I pray people would come around them to help them walk in that way. God, I pray for somebody who's here today and they're listening to this and they know exactly what they've been avoiding, the thing they've been pushing back against, the thing that they need to take responsibility for. I just pray you give them courage to trust you, that they would do all that they sense you instructing them to do. And then they would just rest and trust you to do the rescuing. That's all that all of us can do. And we thank you for the preservation of these stories and this instruction that helps us and reminds us and inspires us to partner with you in what you're up to in the world. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.